conversations that may be picked up. Remember that we have a new closed caption. And then they actually turn on the microphone. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Okay. So good afternoon and welcome to the House Health and Government Operations Committee. I am the chair, Jocelyn Peña-Melnick, and my vice chair, Delegate Bonnie Collison. Great to see you. Since this is our first committee briefing of the 2025 legislative session, I kindly ask for your patience if we encounter any technical or streaming issues, which will happen. This briefing is being streamed on the Maryland General Assembly YouTube channel. Before this briefing, all members were emailed a copy of each presentation. If you do not have these documents, please let committee staff know and we will send you a copy. For the committee, I kindly and respectfully ask that you adhere to the usual committee rules so that we can get out of here by the time that I would love to conclude, 2:30, of one question and one answer from the panel, not one question and one answer from each panelist. Keep your questions brief. Remember that you can also do a lot offline as well. Today, the House Health and Government Operations Committee will hear presentations on cybersecurity, digital services, and artificial intelligence establishment from the Department of Information Technology, DO-IT. Before we get there, I'd like to give Patrick an opportunity to say hi to the committee, and he will be with us this session. So be kind to him. I know I don't have to ask that. You guys are always kind. We are going to begin with Secretary Savage from DO-IT. Secretary, will you be so kind and come up? And if you like to bring, if you have a panel and you like to bring them, you can do that also. I want to thank staff for putting this together and welcome. Will you be so kind and press the button? Okay, that's it. Once. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, Chairwoman Peña-Melnick, for having us today. In addition to myself, we have Marcy Jacobs, who's our Chief Digital Experience Officer, and Nishant Shah, who's our Senior Advisor for Responsible AI. So I'm thrilled to be in front of many of you again. Feels like a little bit of deja vu. I think I was pregnant with my first 2 years ago, so many of you have seen me expecting before. But thrilled to be able to brief you on some of the work that DO-IT has done over the past year before I go out on leave. So today we're going to focus on general do-it updates, and then we'll talk about cybersecurity, talk about digital experience, and talk about AI, as we feel like those are the most relevant topics to this committee. So I can advance them if you want to. All right. So in interest of, thank you. So as I mentioned, we'll talk about our goals and priorities. We'll talk about the way Do It has grown over the past year, and then we'll hit those three areas. So I wanted to just start by grounding. You've probably seen the slide before. The priorities that I've set for the organization are largely unchanged. One, what we've heard from other agencies is the need to streamline our product and service offerings, create a clear and compelling catalog of what we provide as Do It to the state. Two is to mature our cybersecurity efforts, and as I'll talk about, we've done that in three different dimensions. And then third, launching our digital services portfolio and team. And so Marcy will talk about the work we've done in that area. I wanted to briefly touch on the way the organization has changed since I've taken on the role. Prior to joining when I joined the organization, we had 2 assistant secretaries over everything. And my view as a technologist is that you need subject matter experts over all of these key areas. And so we've grown the team quite a bit. As I mentioned, we have Nishant, who has added a team of 3, including himself, as our advisor for responsible AI. Last year, the governor moved the office of the chief data officer under me as well. So Natalie Evans-Harris, the chief information security officer, is under my purview now as well. Marcy, as I mentioned, we also in this past year added not 1, but 2 chief technology officers. So we added a CTO for infrastructure to oversee the Network Maryland and Maryland First programs. And then we added Jason Silva to oversee our enterprise platforms, so collaboration software, finance platforms, et cetera, as well as our service desk. And of course, we have Melissa Lehman, who many of you know, overseeing fiscal, budget, and procurement. And the numbers you see on the bottom of the slide reflect all of the new hires we've made over the past year. So despite the fiscal climate that we're in, we've been able to use our PINs really efficiently and grow the organization. And again, I'm really pleased to be able to have such strong leadership in place across all of these verticals. I think I covered most of that. So as I mentioned, you'll be hearing mostly from Nishant and Marcy today on AI and on digital experience. Jason, Natalie, and Eric, the CTOs and the CDOs, are new in their positions at Do It, so we wanted to give them a little bit more time and potentially present to all of you offline, but we feel like we have the most substantive updates for all of you in these areas today, so you'll hear from the 3 of us. I also wanted to share that I will be covering the cybersecurity section. We are in the process of recruiting a new state chief information security officer, so I will cover that section today. So unless there's any initial questions about the growth of Do It, I'll just dive into the cybersecurity section. All right. So when I started in this role. When I started in this role, it was very clear to me that we have sort of 3 constituencies. First, there's Do It's cybersecurity. And to be honest, that was a little bit of a disconnect. There's things like the security of our network, of Network Maryland. There's things like authority to operate for software. We need to get our own house in order in terms of cybersecurity. So that's sort of the middle ring that you'll see. The second is with regard to statewide agencies. So, we have a responsibility as the Office of Security Management to oversee the security profile of, the Departments of Health, Human Services, et cetera, all of the enterprise agencies. And then lastly, there's the need to provide, to the extent that we can, local cybersecurity expertise. And so as you'll hear in a moment, we've been diving into that area as well. So maybe I'll start with that inner ring and some of the activities that we've undertaken over the past year. So as I mentioned, prior to starting, there wasn't really an internal focus on the Office of Security Management to the rest of Do It. So some of the things that we've done to improve Do It's cybersecurity posture includes expansions and investment into Microsoft and Google to look at things like our identity and access management, improving the way that we manage identity in the state. We've also been doing assessments of the Network Maryland architecture and security, and we've expanded the Security Operations Center. And so collecting more data feeds from across the organization. So for example, the Network Maryland traffic is observable in our SOC. So, again, it's been really exciting to start to bridge that gap and make sure that the Office of Security Management sees DO-IT as a constituent as well. Actually, I should touch on this as well. In addition to the activities that I just mentioned, one thing that I'm really excited to highlight for you today that I brought over with me from the Department of Defense are bug bounties and the vulnerability disclosure program. So for those of you that may not know, a bug bounty is a scoped effort where we ask ethical security researchers to look at our websites and public-facing assets and see if they can identify any vulnerabilities. And this is a really effective strategy because you have sort of a neutral, external, but cleared researcher looking at any vulnerabilities. And so we're able to get feedback before a breach or a security violation might be found proactively. Along those lines, we're also set to launch a vulnerability disclosure program, which allows for anyone in the public who might spot a vulnerability to highlight it to us. Again, we want to encourage that because, even as we're working to put security best practices in place, there might be things that we miss. And so it's exciting to offer the opportunity for researchers in the public who have that expertise and might notice, hey, I can tunnel into this website if I change the URL slightly. Having an opportunity for people to highlight that to us gives us then the opportunity to remediate. So it's things like that we're bringing in as best practice into the department that I'm really excited to share. The next ring that I spoke about, statewide cybersecurity solutions. So the big update there that we've been working on and has been quite a lift in terms of procurement and finding talent is the Information Security Officer Program. So when I started, one of the things that was evident is that most of the state agencies do not have their own Chief Information Security Officer, which makes it difficult for them to monitor their own, their websites, monitor their own applications, et cetera. And so we've recently onboarded 15 people, which again, I can't underscore enough is a big sort of lift in terms of HR and procurement, to be assigned to each of those respective executive branch agencies to help them with their remediation of findings under the 2022 assessments that were conducted of each of the agencies. And so things we'll be working with agencies with include making sure all of their assets are flowing from a data perspective into our Security Operations Center, looking at centralized password management, email and phishing attempts, making sure that they have endpoint protection on all of their devices, that they're all behind a firewall, et cetera. So the ISOs, as we're calling them, the information security officers that are assigned to agencies, will have the remit of ensuring that our best practices that DO-IT proliferate across the agencies. So even those agencies, especially those agencies that don't have their own chief information security officer, will benefit from our expertise. And then lastly, the outer ring of local cybersecurity, which I'm sure is near and dear to many of you representing constituents. So we have been collaborating with the Department of Emergency Management on the state and local cybersecurity grant program. There's funding that comes from DHS and FEMA to look at the security, health and security of counties and municipalities in particular. So as of today, we have 35 units of local government that have taken advantage of this grant and have asked us to do a security assessment. We have completed 3 full assessments since July when that funding became available to us, and in some cases identified remediation that we can start to tackle. We've also grown the local cybersecurity team. So we have now a team of 6, including 5, including contractors. We have also partnered with the Maryland military departments. We announced this last January that we would have a partnership with the National Guard to provide additional expertise. And we've onboarded, or at any given time, have 7 to 8 National Guard members to augment that team of 5 to provide support to locals. And then lastly, something that we're exploring is allowing counties and municipalities to piggyback off of our software contracts. So we haven't launched this yet, but to the extent we've identified a software solution for endpoint protection, for example, and a county says, I would like to roll that out as well, we're making that available. And the last thing I'll mention on cybersecurity, I'm particularly passionate about ensuring that wastewater and utilities have sort of a community of practice. I think our utilities could be potentially a high-value target, and so we want to make sure that we're working as hyper-locally as possible to provide cybersecurity support. So I will transition to, I don't know if you want to do questions on that section first or just roll through, but.
We'll do it at the end, if it's okay. Thank you.
That sounds great. So that concludes the cyber portion. And with that, I will turn it over to Sean.
Thank you.
And
Good afternoon.
Advance your slides if you'd like.
I got it.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Secretary Savage, and thanks to Chair Pena-Melnick and the committee to invite us here today. I'm Nishant Shah. I lead DO-IT's work around AI enablement. And as you know, AI continues to advance rapidly, and so DO-IT, alongside the AI subcabinet, working teams across state agencies, external partners, we continue to build out the state's capabilities around responsible and productive use. So I'll start by hitting on just a few highlights from 2024. And we really saw that year as one of building scaffolding, essentially going from 0 to 1. And the year started with the governor's AI executive order and then the passage of SB 818. We created and disseminated initial guidance for state agencies detailing how they can leverage generative AI tools responsibly and ethically and productively. We partnered with Innovate US, a 501c3, in making available free async AI courses and workshops for Maryland's workforce and state employees. We've had hundreds of folks take these so far. We collected the state's first AI inventory, detailing all the live AI use cases, and we're in the midst right now looking through those and working with agencies to ensure that they're comprehensive and accurate before publishing. A variety of state agencies established AI proofs of concept to start learning by doing and experimenting from, these range from document processing to natural language data analysis to application verification in permitting and licensing processes. We conceptualized and hired the first members of an AI enablement team in DO-IT, and these folks just started in the last few weeks. This team will serve as a center of excellence and incubation shop for both our governance efforts and our adoption efforts. And the subcabinet completed a 2025 AI strategy and study roadmap in December, as required by SB 818. I think many of you probably saw a draft version of this in December, but just today we've released the finalized and public version, which is available on DO-IT's website. So looking ahead, 2025 promises to be quite a significant year in the broader AI ecosystem. And so our approach is really designed to set the state up for success in effective adoption, no matter the direction the technology evolves. And specifically, the roadmap that I just mentioned that we released outlines 5 strategic pillars that we'll focus on this year. The first is we will mature the state's AI governance capabilities. And this is really crucial to ensuring responsible and ethical use. Among other things, that'll include retrofitting our intake processes to be fit for purpose for AI projects, publishing the AI inventory, requiring all use cases to go through a risk classification and assessments process, which will also include some form of testing, evaluation, validation, and verification, and iterating on these capabilities from a V1 to a V2 and onwards, so always staying sort of at the frontier and cutting edge. The second is we will strengthen the state's data foundations. As we all know, garbage in, garbage out. So our success in AI as a state really lives or dies with a success in data. And that work will specifically be led by the Office of Enterprise Data under State Chief Data Officer Natalie Evans-Harris. And it'll focus on really crucial elements here, like data governance, leveraging synthetic data, developing standards that identify whether a data set is AI ready, for example. Third, we will double down on building momentum and experimentation and adoption. In 2024, we were more opportunistic. And in 2025, with a team in place, we'll be more structured. We'll take a variety of different approaches here, from enabling more bottom-up experimentation with broadly available tools to establishing what we're calling beachhead use cases, which will help agency partners execute or procure a proof of concept in areas that we believe show particular promise, to doing sort of hackathons in specific areas to get agencies leveraging some of these tools. I think this is exciting because we'll start seeing the first proofs of concept go into production through these efforts. Fourth, we'll increase what we're calling sort of the state's AI IQ. This is the ability for the workforce to leverage the technology and to ensure that we have the talent to usher it in these sort of foundational times. That'll include significantly increasing the percentage of the state workforce that takes the AI trainings. It will sort of be making smart hires across the state to develop the technical talent that's needed here. It'll include strengthening the community of practice that we kicked off last year. And it will also sort of include establishing partnerships with external bodies, across academia, civil society, and industry that can help us in relevant areas. And sort of last but not least, and as, again, mandated by SB 818, we'll study and cohere state approaches to AI in sort of critical domains. These are areas like AI in local school systems, in critical infrastructure, in healthcare. Different agencies will lead different deep dives with relevant partners here, but in aggregate, this will really get us a strong sense of the risks, the opportunities, and the sector-specific approaches that are rooted in really Maryland-specific data trends and voices. And actually not mentioned on this slide, but I think critically, we'll cohere and strengthen the AI enablement team that we mentioned to support these various pillars and help agencies build their own capacity. So thanks again to the committee, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards. On to Marcy.
Next, please.
I can either advance for you or. Okay.
I'm just going to stay here for 1 second. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Can you get a little closer?
Better? Okay, great. I'm short. Thank you for having me today. I'm Marcy Jacobs. I'm the Chief Digital Experience Officer. I am excited to talk to you about digital experience and just kind of to ground that in what are we talking about. Digital experience is the experience that people have interacting with government. So it's government websites, it's government forms, it's government applications. It even is the letters that they're getting and the PDFs that are printed out that they're reading. So it's really thinking about how do people engage with our technology. I think, as you may not be surprised, there are some opportunities to improve the experience that we are putting out for constituents. Our digital experience has kind of grown up over time. We have lots and lots and lots of websites that have been kind of thought about from a very inside-out perspective. What is the information that I need to provide, and what do I want to tell people? And it's really not grounded in who's coming and what are they trying to do, and how do we make sure that what we are saying is answering the questions that people have. When we think about how people transact or interact with government, there's kind of a journey of I learn about a thing, I might apply for a thing that could be a benefit or a permit or a license or a tax credit. And then I am going through some waiting period where I need to understand what's happening and then use my benefit and maybe renew it. Across that journey, there are lots of opportunities to shift from the way we currently approach these problems, which is start with technology, to thinking about what does success look like? How do we start with people? And those are both people outside of agencies and people inside of agencies, and use technology to set those people up for success. So my team is focused on that landscape. How do we transform the digital experience of interacting with Maryland government in ways that make it easier for us to maintain and support this landscape of a very large portfolio of products? So when we think about the different initiatives, we really ground this in starting with people, starting with journeys, starting with user research. We're looking at websites. We're looking at kind of our front door, maryland.gov, which is an opportunity to kind of be outside of our individual agency silos and not force our constituents to understand where something lives or what department or agency provides a benefit or service, but think about things more in terms of benefits or permits and licensing, and how do we aggregate information in ways that our customers are thinking about it and less so the way we provide it. So making it easier for people to find what they're looking for. We're doing that in a very data-driven way. We have built an analytics dashboard, analytics.maryland.gov, which gives us better insight into where are people going. And we're also using similar tools to work with agencies so that they can understand what of their content is actually effective, what of their content is being visited, how often is. How do we help them use data to figure out what needs to stay and what needs to be changed? We're working on a new content management system pilot, which to some degree is forced by the fact that our current in about a year and a half, and we want to make sure that our websites are supported both from a cybersecurity standpoint, but are also easier for agencies to maintain and easier for our customers to navigate. On the right-hand side, after people find things, they need to transact with things. And there are a number of different initiatives that are working to improve how do we transact with people. So my team is responsible for oversight of our major IT development projects. And a lot of those systems are very transactional systems, both from an external user and an internal user. The benchmarks that we are using right now for oversight are very dated. They are very much using a waterfall process. Gather requirements for a long time, do procurement for a long time, and then build that list of things. We are starting to shift to more of a product management mindset, which is more around what are the outcomes that we're trying to drive, what is the smallest thing that we can build so that we can start addressing the problem and also learning as we are addressing the problem. So we're changing some of the oversight kind of auditing to make sure that we're really grounding that on modern software development principles. We also recognize that there are agencies that need additional help. So reforming oversight is a piece of it, but there are agencies who are going to need additional support. So we are defining a new model of supporting agencies with engineers and designers and product managers who can come in for a discrete period of time and help agencies with their major IT project. We are working on the permitting and licensing space. We're doing a small pilot in that space focused on professional licensing. We're also working on a project called the Maryland Web Design System, which is basically a component library. So we are building the reusable pieces, buttons and accordions, and the reusable code that are built to be accessible and make it faster and more consistent for us to build whatever it is that we're building, whether it's websites or applications. We have a code library. And this is coming from the US government. There's a US web design system that we are leveraging very heavily, and then customizing that to Maryland. We're also responsible for plain language. Plain language is basically, can people understand what they're reading? Is it written in a way that makes sense to the people who need to get their question answered or apply for a benefit? So we are working with agencies to bring plain language to our website content, to our forms and applications, and we are going to be doing some pilots in that space as well. You can go to the next slide. So I just want to drill down on the oversight and intervention. I think these two concepts have been a little bit conflated. Oversight is an auditing function. It is run on every single MITDP, major IT development project. There are around 70 in our portfolio. This is very much is this project spending what they said that they would spend on the things that they said they would spend it on? It is not there to drive the project or own the project or take over the project. It is truly auditing. The intervention side of the house is a very different skill set of people who are coming in to support these projects and a very, very small set of these projects to make sure that they get help if they are stuck. So that may look like coming in to do a technical evaluation and help steer them in a direction, or say the direction that you're on makes sense. You might want to just consider these additional things. So it's really just bringing some engineering and product and design expertise to this small set of projects that have been prioritized. And I think we're at questions.
All right.
Okay.
With that, we're happy to take questions.
Thank you,
from the
and
committee.
thank you for your presentation today. We really appreciate it. I do have some members that have questions. I'm going to start to my right with Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary, and for your staff. Good to see all of you. Last year at this time, I was noting that the flow chart of the office and the one on the Maryland manual and the one on your website all were 3 different versions.
Yeah.
I was delighted, of course, to see that this completely matched the Maryland manual. So, but I still couldn't find it on your website. So that was one question. But also, this is like the simplest contact part. Is this also true for other agencies now, that people can find things on that state website and the Maryland manual, and that it's at least the last 6 months accurate?
You want to talk about website?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam.
You're welcome. Who's the best person to answer that question? Yes.
I'm happy to answer. I would say that the website, keeping things in sync across multiple sites when we have information that between the state directory and an agency org chart and what's in the Maryland manual is a challenge. And that is one of the things that we are exploring with the new content management system. Ideally, we are not posting the same information 3 different places, but we have one authoritative source that can be published to 3 different places. We are not there yet. So one of the first sites that we are working on in this new way is the Do It site, which is why you have not found the org chart on the Do It site, because we are mid-flight in making those improvements, but that will be available in the next few months.
Thank you. Next, I have Delegate Chisholm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question for Katie. Katie, 60 Minutes on Sunday night did an interview with Christopher Wray. And last year, I put in a bill to prohibit scrutinized entities from joining into our procurement system in the state of Maryland, because the national procurement system bans these entities, but each state has the right to decide on their own. So, and he called China the greatest cybersecurity threat that we face right now, bigger than every other nation combined. So obviously they're trying to attack us 24/7, 365 days a year. My question is, how much communication do we have, and I know we're in a transition right now, between your office and the federal agencies that are overseeing this, and NSA, and how much cooperation and what extra steps are we putting in to make sure that we're protecting all the information that we house in our data system?
Sure. So I'll take the first part, and then I do want to give Marcy an opportunity to maybe talk about the work with Emma from a procurement perspective, to specifically address how we're talking about the database that we might want to secure. So we have very regular communication with CISA, with the at DHS. So they are organized into different regions, and we meet with our regional officer quite a bit. We also, through the MDI SAC, get sort of bi-directional information. So we receive that information from CISA, and then we use the MDI SAC to disseminate it. So the conversation is bi-directional. There's a lot that we observe at the agencies or at the local level that we pass to CISA, and that CISA then engages with us. We also have been working to take that information and ensure that's in policy. So we have a prohibited companies, like a banned list as well, that mirrors CISA's. So it includes like TikTok, for example, in line with what has been recommended. Myself and I would say a number of our cybersecurity team, we all came from DoD and or NSA, and so we have those relationships as well. Marcy, I don't know if you want to speak to some of the application security that we've also been putting in place. One of the challenges that we have at the state is that the agencies manage their own applications. So while we can put bans in place, so actually, let me back up. So we can put bans in place for what we procure and work really closely with the Office of State Procurement to ensure that they send us everything and say, should we be procuring this or not? And we can say yes, no. And so we have that process in place. One of the things that we're doing, sort of a hard to read thing on one of the slides around the state cybersecurity, but the upgrades that we're putting in place with Microsoft and Google also allow us to do better mobile device management. And so to the extent you have an employee downloading something they shouldn't be, we can prevent that. And so that's something that we're also putting as an additional measure. And then there's the application layer. So to the extent an agency builds their own custom application for, say, juvenile management or things like that, or in the case of the state procurement office putting a procurement database together. Those are some of the things that Marcy's team through the Maryland Digital Service can do, is take an additional pass at making sure that we have security features in place.
I'm happy to chime in. That is something that we have definitely seen in the website space. We have around 800 websites in the state, and the levels of security across those different domains is incredibly varied. So we are looking at how do we clean up what we have? How do we migrate to secure domain names? How are we putting security in front of those websites, but also all of these applications? So in the instance of Emma, our procurement system, there was a part of the bug bounty project looked at a lot of these different systems, and we're making sure that any vulnerabilities that have been identified are being addressed. So working with the agency owners across a lot of different systems, if there are any findings, to make sure that they have a plan for how to mitigate those.
Since you're the experts on this, because it's obvious it's a very important thing, and it's being spoke about on a regular basis now, you would agree that you're only as strong as your weakest link. And how much work are we doing even I know that you coordinate a little bit locally, but the water supply is a big concern for people now. And, the counties obviously are in control of their water supply, but also you oversee a lot of that as well. And are you training with your background different, because obviously they're consistently going through their own employee base as well, and you have new people that are behind the computer all the time. How well are they being trained to look out for these things? The Chinese are very smart about what they're doing. It's something that is a great threat to this country. So
I do want to correct, we don't actually oversee public utilities. So there's a separate public utilities commission, and so they actually have purview. So it is something that does not currently fall under DoIT. So that's one of the reasons that we've set up a community of practice, because we don't have oversight, but I share that fear with you. So we've set up a community of practice to say, to your point, I mean, many of these utility managers have been there 30, 40 years, well before the advent of some of these cybersecurity threats, and so we want to make that available. We've also started conversations, back to your question about how we interface with NSA or CISA. We've also, and we have the funding from CISA and FEMA, and so we've started the conversation with them to ask if we could apply some of that funding towards training for utilities as well. A lot of the funding has gone towards counties and municipalities for their assessments, but I agree with you. I think sort of what can we do around upskilling those particular utilities as well. So while it doesn't fall under us, we're trying to kind of kickstart. We have the community practice with utilities right now, and think hopefully that can be a model for other utilities.
You're welcome. Great questions. I have Delegate Kerr, followed by Delegate White-Hallam.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
My pleasure.
Hello, Secretary Savage. You've been busy. Yeah, considering the briefing you gave us last year and where we are this year, it's been a lot of work in finishing the AI inventory and building your team and creating the roadmap. And I'm also really interested to see how your idea works out with allowing the municipalities to piggyback onto contracts. I can just see the potential for that, for the ease of implementation and support and creating a consistent constituent experience across the state. But I wanted to go back to something you said earlier about that a lot of the agencies don't have a CISO. Mm-hmm. So who is doing the 24/7 monitoring now? If they don't have that in place, are they subbing it out? Are you providing that service?
It's a great question. So with regard to the monitoring, we are making sure that their assets flow into the centralized security operations center, and helping them identify what are the critical assets, whether that's video or facilities or applications. We're ensuring that their data does flow centrally. So we have an eye on that at the state. What the ISO program then attempts to do is look at the rest of their operational security, their hardware, their software, et cetera, and look at things like administrative rights and privileges, password security, phishing attempts, and how they're training employees. And so some of the agencies have an IT director or somebody sort of in that role, but some of the smaller agencies don't. So that's where the ISO program will complement it. So while I feel good about the centralized monitoring that we already have in place, it's those kind of like operational security aspects that I'd like to strengthen.
Delegate White-Hallam, followed by Delegate Johnson.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon and providing these highlights. Indeed, I echo Delegate Kerr's sentiments, and you all have been busy indeed. And so I wanted to focus on AI enablement. And aside from some of the free trainings that you all offer all state employees, I wanted to get a better sense, and if you could expound upon the value add or the benefits that this provides to our state employees, and what, if any, shifts you could see or are seeing as we continue to adopt and maybe build AI within our daily practice and routine. Like what does the workload look like for employees? Because again, people are still at the center of the work in which that we do, and ensuring that Maryland is working and working well. Right. And so as we begin to adopt AI, I just wanted to see what are the benefits, but also what type of shifts could we very well see when it comes to our workforce. Yeah,
I appreciate that. I'll turn over to Nishant momentarily. One of the great products that Nishant has rolled out has been our AI roadmap, which has been a conversation with all of the major agencies that I think some agencies have been really prepared, and others, I think it's been really sort of driving them to say, like, how do you think about AI? How could you be using it better? And so the framework that Nishant has been putting in place has really, I think, been helping the agencies open up their aperture for exactly the questions that you've been asking, and we see that as a continuously evolving document. The other thing I'll say before turning it over is I think Nishant and I both share the view that AI will not replace the workforce. It'll just help the already constrained workforce that we have be more efficient, sort of do more with less. So, some of the examples, talking about the licensing and permitting example, talking about some of the health examples, I think we share the view that it will augment the workforce, not supplant it, but if you want to expound a little bit.
No, plus 100 to all of that. And it's a fantastic question. Training is not the end all be all. It's just a initial step. And even the way that training will manifest will change over time as the workforce develops deeper skills in leveraging AI and they leverage it in different parts of their workflows. The types of trainings will need to change, and they'll need to become more role-specific. For a procurement official, there's probably a different set of things to understand about responsible AI and how to procure AI responsibly, and what are the questions you need to be asking vendors and to sort of teams. And public interest lawyers have a different set of things that they need to understand around copyright and liability and that type of thing. So even on that training front, our sort of idea is to sort of build along that maturity curve. Start with broad-based trainings that sort of give the workforce the 101, a sense of how to leverage these tools, what are the basics that they can be used to do. If you're writing an email that is being sent to a colleague and you want to make it more effective and format it, that's like a very clear sort of win. But if you want to do that as a public-facing communication, there's a different set of things to take into account, from bias in systems and that kind of thing. And so that's integrating both how to use it productively, but then also responsibly in that training is sort of a key part. A lot of this is also sort of learning by doing, and it's giving folks access to tools. We put out a set of generative AI sort of interim guidance that unblocked use of these tools, across the state on sort of commercially off-the-shelf solutions. And we've noticed a lot of agencies leverage, ChatGPT for sort of basic workflows where you're not using, personally identifiable information or anything that you shouldn't be putting into these systems. And the little bit that we've seen here is that it's helped folks quite a bit save some time on, daily efforts. The next stage of a lot of all this is integrating it into workflows in a more fit-for-purpose way. And so you'll see some combination of like commercially off-the-shelf tools with us procuring systems and integrating generative AI into systems that sort of take drudgery away from existing workflows. You can imagine systems like procurement and others where there's lots of different steps. A to B to C to D, and the handful of folks that have to push these steps forwards, bless their hearts, it's a tough job. And so the idea is, can we actually use this more as like a Jarvis suit to sort of give superpowers to these folks to be able to do more? That's sort of the goal here.
Thank you. Delegate Johnson, followed by Delegate Taveras.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for coming to give us information on the technical side and the people side. My question's more on the financial side. Our last audit showed an unacceptable amount of money spent on overruns for projects. So are there any new processes in place that provide more accountability and oversight to keep things more in line with the budget and control the overruns?
Sure. It's a great question. There's two efforts I want to highlight. So the governor announced Friday an executive order related to government modernization, and we are one of two agencies that are starting as part of that effort. And that outlines three kind of big opportunities for my department to be engaged in. One is looking, as you mentioned, at software itself and software consolidation. We're sort of what I inherited is sort of an odd approach to IT centralization in state, where we have a lot of the IT staff, but we've still allowed the agencies to, in some cases, buy and negotiate their own software contracts. And so that's one thing that we'll be looking at, how do we sort of harness our collective purchasing power and do that more centrally. It's the same thing with hardware, which is another major category. For some reason, the larger the agency, the more we've said, go forth and procure your own hardware. And so that's an opportunity again. And we have a pretty good hardware refresh cycle at Do It. And so it's working with the other agencies to, absorb our model and to work with us to kind of more collectively buy hardware. So, one major initiative is this modernization effort that the governor mentioned or announced on Friday. The other one, which you might be speaking to, is the Major IT Development Project Fund, or what's now known as the IT Investment Fund, which is under Marcy's shop. So as she was mentioning, we oversee this, we have an oversight role for the 70-plus project portfolio that are largely agencies trying to modernize systems. And I agree with you. Up until this point, it's been largely focused on, an agency asked for $30 million. How well are they spending that? Which, inevitably, there are cost overruns because we're looking at, a vendor comes to you 3 years into the project and says, I'm not going to be done. What are you going to, it's kind of too late. So one of the things, I'll ask Marcy to add to this, we don't believe in these sort of mega awards up front. What we're trying to do is start, when an agency comes and says we want to launch a project, we first want to start with a period of discovery. As Marcy was saying, we're not going to give you $30 million up front. Let's start with 2 to 5 and assess what needs to be done. Let's not say we're going to do a one and done requirements gathering, but let's start by conducting interviews. Let's figure out what the minimum viable product would be. And so really taking, what we in the technology industry would say a stage gate approach to building technology. First, let's start with this discovery period. Second, let's move into some prototyping of the minimum viable product. If 3 employees need to use this, what does that need to look like? Then moving into sort of scaling, and then moving into implementation. So we're hoping to, a major initiative under Marcy is this MITDP reform, and taking a look at how we stage gate process projects, and also giving us more flexibility in the contracting aspect. We've really tended to lean into time and materials contracts in the state, which has also led to cost overruns because, again, there's not vendor incentive if you're a T&M contract. So we're trying to move to either firm fixed price or a deliverables-based or outcomes-based type of contract, which again pairs nicely with the stage gate process. Were you able in 2 years to complete this minimum viable product for a much smaller award? So I would say a major initiative that Marcy and I have worked on or trying to kick off is how we look at that, because I agree with you. The cost overruns are largely a combination of not having had people with a product mindset previously and kind of leaning into this mega award up front opposed to this kind of smaller iterative approach. But Marcy, if there's anything to...
Yeah, I'll just pile on that there is a lot of research that shows that the traditional approach of gathering exhaustive requirements in the beginning, which never covers everything, leads to these types of overruns. We wrote down all these things, and then we had a vendor build all these things. And then at the end, the customer is not happy because they didn't think of every possible thing when they were asked the question. And this shift that Secretary Savage was talking about, which is what is very common in industry, is to think about, instead of being exhaustive and write down pages and pages and pages of requirements, but to think about what is the smallest thing that we can do? What is truly the thing that we can deliver that will help us start to address this problem and start to learn about how much further we need to go? And when we delegate that to vendor teams, there's a lot of gold plating that happens. There's a lot of, it needs to do this and it needs to do this. When we watch behavior and we see what people really need and we ground our investment based on the tasks that people are trying to complete, we can have much simpler systems so we can spend less going forward. So that is part of the oversight reform that we are focused on.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Usually we allow one person, but I'm allowing it because it's really clear, and I think it's important to get the whole picture as well. We do have Delegate Taveras, followed by Delegate Banjari, followed by Delegate Hill, then Vice Chair Collison, and then Delegate Woods. Delegate Taveras.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
And I guess this question goes directly to Mr. Shah, because in one of your presentations, we were looking at looking ahead at 2025, and what are you looking to, the steps in terms of maturing, strengthening, and building, the momentum and such. And I do want to echo what my colleagues have already said, compared to where you were, compared to where you are. Obviously, it's been amazing, the trajectory. And I recall being in a conference where we were looking at best practices of implementing these tools. I use them in my office with my staff and whatnot, but we always want to be able to have that human eye, right? Because as best practice, you always want to be able to have somebody review, making sure that nothing goes out the door that's not appropriate. And so is it ultimately the goal not just to have these tools, but also to implement the policies on how to use these tools? Because we don't want to be put in a position, let's say, God forbid, like UHC, right, where they're approving operations and it's an AI tool, right, that's making that call versus somebody who's got real life experience.
Absolutely, and it's a fantastic point, and that's sort of when I mentioned sort of our governance framework. That would really be the set of activities and artifacts and playbooks that would ensure that those outcomes are not sort of what ends up happening. And so, we're working on a policy. It'll come out in a few weeks that starts with essentially creating a risk classification playbook that shows, okay, for a given use case, how risky is this use case? Is it high, medium, low? We're coming up with sort of that taxonomy. But if it is high risk, and high risk defined as being sort of safety impacting, rights impacting, and a few more details there, then it will require a deeper risk assessment, and that risk assessment will go much deeper into that use case itself. It'll ask the vendor a number of questions, more questions, and sort of deeper knowledge about the model itself, about the use case and how the AI system will be used, both the inputs and the outputs. And to your point, questions like, is there a human in the loop? For if it's a benefit system, to ensure that there is no automated decision here that then sort of takes human agency out of that workflow. Instead, it is helping agencies who are running that workflow rather than sort of a purely automated system. So that's how we're thinking about it. There's a lot more within that governance sort of framework and types of approaches that you can take to test and evaluate models and ensure that they are in line with the principles that we've adopted as a state, things like transparency and privacy and accountability and a handful of others, reliability. And so that's the approach that we're taking. I mentioned V1 to V2 to V3. As AI's capabilities change continuously, like on a monthly, weekly basis, it's evolving quite quickly. These governance approaches will need to be updated as well. And so that, the strategy that we're creating is one that continuously revisits what we initially put out and sees policies as living documents that, we'll need to update every few months to ensure that as terms and conditions change from vendors and companies, as the new use cases come in line, that we'll have to weigh sort of the trade-offs of like the pros and cons there, and can we come to a set of guardrails that allows the risk to be mitigated to put something into production? Those will all be sort of part of that conversation.
Thank you. I have Delegate Bandari, followed by Delegate Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary Savage, while the Department of Information outlined very ambitious goal on cybersecurity, AI, and digital service, when I was looking through your presentation, there appears to be a very significant challenge in addressing the fragmented state Maryland digital infrastructure. In one of the slide, current state of Maryland digital government is highlighted by 1,300 permits. 1,300 permits, licenses, and certifications still relying on outdated and manual process. Our committee wonders what specific metrics or benchmark is your department using to measure the success of these initiatives, and how you will ensure accountability in streamlining these processes to build trust and improve access for Marylanders?
Sure, I'll turn it over to Marcy because she's been engaged in the Government Transparency Act, which touches the licenses and permits, and she also has our one-stop product under her purview. So I'll turn it over to Marcy.
Yeah, and I will just preface by saying we have just kicked off this effort looking at these 1,300 permits and license. But your question is really good in terms of understanding what does success look like. And I think for many of the responses that we saw in the data call that went out to agencies, they want to be able to process information more quickly. So they want to be able to turn around these applications to constituents in a more timely manner. But they also want to provide transparent information. So we've heard feedback that people submit an application or a form and it kind of goes into a little bit of a black hole, which, as you all, you may be the ones who are hearing some of those escalations when people call the contact center, they're not getting an answer, and they continue to escalate. So that all creates downstream churn and burden for agencies. So we want to help make agencies more efficient as they are processing all of these applications, and ideally use modern software processes to remove burden on both the constituent side, but also on the agency side.
Thank you. I have Delegate Hill, followed by Vice Chair Collison, and then I believe, Delegate Woods, and then Delegate Szeliga.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all
My pleasure.
for the work and for being here today. And as my committee members will know, I actually have two questions, but I think I'm only allowed to ask one, but maybe if we have time later, I can come back at the, at the end. just a little hint, since Delegate Chisholm had a great follow-up. So I'm going to ask this one. Deputy Secretary Jacobs, that you talked about our forward-facing presence in the web. What I find to be frustrating for many of my constituents and for me personally is it's just hard to find a phone number. And if I find a phone number, it's hard to find somebody who's going to answer in a timely fashion. So is the lack of phone numbers published on the landing page of our agencies and departments a deliberate effort to redirect people to email and to do something with the workforce, or is it an oversight? Is this, so what is going on with these phone numbers that we can't find?
I would say it's probably a little bit of both. I think that there are agencies that do not have the staff capacity to answer lots and lots and lots of phone calls. We have just released recently on the Do-It hosted websites that are in a certain template, I won't get into all the details, a consistent footer, which has agency contact information for every agency that's using that footer. It's about 50 agency sites. So we are working on improving that. There's always going to be a need for contact information and for phone numbers, but when we design more effective information, ideally we're trying to make some of these processes as self-service as they can be. So I think that as we lower the need for people to call, we're also improving the ability to keep that information current and up to date with an easier content management system, because a lot of agencies don't really have a dedicated team. So when somebody leaves and somebody else comes in and they need to update the phone numbers, it just becomes a big kind of maintenance problem for them. So I think many agencies have just decided to take that information off.
Go ahead and ask your second. Okay, and the second question, thank you, Madam Chair. The second question, I'd love to have a follow-up conversation with you about that. But the second question, I'm going to, quote the White Rabbit from Lewis Carroll: "The hurrier I go, the behinder I get." So you guys have done a lot of work, and every day we're reading about how, as you said, Nishant, the technology is advancing faster. Can you give us some sense of hope, or not hope, just your real professional assessment of, are we going to be able to catch up with where we need to be, and are there some additional tools that you need from us to help us stay as current as possible?
So I love this question. I feel you tee me up. And one of the things I probably have shared with you already that's been really shocking and interesting to me in meeting with my peers, my fellow state CIOs, is that historically this role has been a contract management role. Most of my peers in other states are lawyers, which was very shocking to me. My predecessor was a lawyer, and not that there's anything wrong with the legal profession, but we haven't thought about, I feel like my role is to build enterprise architecture for the state. What is the modern set of things? To Nishant's point about workflows and processes, what are the common workflows, the common processes that state government needs to run, and what are the underlying technology elements? Whether that's the network and connectivity or hardware, laptops and devices, and increasingly software and software as a service that need to sort of underscore all of that. And so that's why I'm really excited, in particular, about our Chief Technology Officer that just started this past May. And we're having conversations that, as many of you have acknowledged, and I really appreciate, wouldn't have been possible, a couple of years ago, around what is the vision for enterprise software going forward. And some of that is AI, but as Nishant and I have talked about, it's AI plus everything. It's AI as one sort of tool or one sort of technology, in the way that, enterprise cloud was new, several years ago. AI is new. And so what I'm excited about and trying to spend most of my focus on is adding these types of roles, like a chief technology officer, like an enterprise architect, who can be sort of anticipating where we need to go. Because it's not just about, are you getting the best deal from Google? It's about, where do we need to go? And so, again, the org chart is really expanded because I want visionaries who are anticipating, where is data collection, management, and use going? Where is enterprise software going? Where is our network going? We also had an announcement last week with the governor around building a digital infrastructure group. He announced an EO. How are we thinking about modern enterprise infrastructure? We are trying to get more connectivity to communities, more connectivity to state facilities. So I'm really excited about the time spent on building the organization and organizational design, so we can, to your point, be in a better position to anticipate, not just, are we getting a good deal?
And thank you for your patience as we ask these questions, okay? Vice Chair Collison.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to add my thanks to the work that you've done in the last 12 months. It's pretty remarkable.
Thank you.
So my question's from the 100,000 feet, and I am very concerned about cybersecurity. I mean, the hack of the MDH was devastating to the state for 6-7 months. So we don't want that to happen again. So my question, I'm going to blend a couple of questions. One does the fact that each agency has its own platform make us as a state more vulnerable in terms of cybersecurity? And I think I heard you say you hired 15 people to sort of help those agencies, but is that the best model, or is there another model we should be looking at? And in the transition that you have in the cybersecurity department right now, who's working on it now? It's a really current kind of issue. So I'm worried that there's this vacancy. So
no, it's a really great question, and I think we're tackling that in a few different ways. So, actually, going back to the government modernization initiative. It's not just a matter of, are we assigning them an information security officer, but should they be having their own instance of things in the first place? And I would argue no. I mean, one of the challenges that we're having, and maybe this is too in the weeds, but from an identity and access management issue, is that we've allowed agencies to manage their own Active Directories, their own list of employees. They then feed that to us and say, yes, this person can have a Google account. Why would we do it that way? So one of the upgrades we're making, the investment in Microsoft and Google that we're making, is a centralized identity and access management platform, so that comes through Do It. So to your point, it's not about do you have an ISO or not, but there should be one central, we already have an HR platform. Why does that not just feed into identity and access management, which then feeds into how we provision licenses? So, exactly to your point, we are trying to centralize a lot of that because just the talent goes a long way, but there's also tools that platforms that we need to be bringing into one place because, to your point, from a cybersecurity perspective, it's a nightmare. Just to tap into the IAM piece alone. The other thing, and also it dovetails with the government modernization and work and the question about software development. We have a lot of custom tools in the state, a lot of custom applications that we've, brought in vendors to build. And that's not just in the state. I was at Department of Defense before this, and it was very common there. Vendors could always pitch, you need something custom because of the security features and our security levels. And some of that is true, but I think, we're moving into an era where we can leverage either commercial off-the-shelf products, which are much easier to sort of vet than custom-built applications and or software as a service. And so something you subscribe to. Those are a lot easier to assess in terms of a software bill of goods. Walk me through how this product was built. It's easier to do an assessment in terms of an authority to operate. So I'm also hoping, and this is something Marcy and I talked about, we have this, what I would love to see over time is that the custom developments that we're overseeing at the state goes down, and then we start to see sort of more centralized platforms that we're using. So can we buy sort of one tool that covers a lot of use cases instead of this sort of myriad customization, which exactly to your point, increases our attack surface in a really worrisome way. So I'm hoping that Marcy over time has fewer projects to manage, and our CTO Jason has sort of more centralized platforms. To your question, so Jason Silva, who's our CTO, will be acting CISO at this time. We also have, I brought someone over with me from DoD who serves as the director of state cybersecurity, and the ISO program falls under him. So we should have pretty consistent leadership in both dimensions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have Delegate Woods, followed by Shalega.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Deputy Savage. Excuse me. Secretary Savage, Deputy Jacobs, and Advisor Shaw. My question specifically relates and maybe piggybacks on my colleague Delegate White Holland's question regarding AI. Yeah. For me, the elephant in the room and the conversation that I hear all of the time regarding AI, I hear us talking about all state employees will have the opportunity to get training in AI. How do we look at responsible AI in terms of leveraging those shortfalls in state employment? And do we see where there is a strategy or a way that we can look at increasing employment, at least to the degree of decreasing the current deficiencies that we have, leveraging AI to do so?
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Nishant, but one example that I think about is when we're talking about crime, for example, and you have before DoD, I was at the city of Chicago, and they're like one of the most cameraed cities, in the world. But who processes that data? What good is all of that data if you can't actually analyze it? And so, back to the point around the AI roadmap and helping agencies think about, where in particular are there these large data sets that could really benefit from that tool? Or Nishant also mentioned where you have a very high customer volume. And some of that is going to be better information on the website, but also more efficient ways of communicating. So I think step one is the roadmap that we've been developing, which is really pushing the agencies to say, where could you leverage this more efficiently? But turn it over to you if you have additional
No, I think that basically covers it. Also, it's giving both the workforce, but also leaders like CIOs across agencies and procurement officials and others, an understanding of what is an AI-shaped problem. AI is not the solution to all things, to many things, and is sometimes introduces risk that is not worth it for the benefits you would gain from leveraging in certain cases. So having, and we're thinking through this concept of like a center for excellence, where a use case would come into that center of excellence, and we would help the agency think through it from the product perspective. Is this the right fit for the thing that you're trying to solve for? And from the governance perspective, like how do you put the guardrails around it that ensures that its use is responsible, to your point? And I see this team as, again, I call it AI enablement, and that word is on purpose because the agency secretaries and CIOs and folks who are running the workflows at the agencies understand sort of the needs in a depth that I never will. And so I see a lot of this job as empowering them with these capabilities so that they sort of make the connections to say that, okay, like in our permitting process, it takes a long time to verify, the information coming in. We have 2 permit engineers doing this, but 1,000 applications coming in every few weeks. And, they're taking a long time to get to this. Can we actually automate some of that on the front end and have Gen AI help with sort of that review process so that by the time it gets to those permit engineers, they can have the time that it takes to take a look at that. So that would be something like an example where someone who owns that workflow, if we do our job well and equip them with the knowledge to say, okay, this is a place where AI can be leveraged, then it's like a secondary step of sort of finding the proofs of concept to see, like, is it actually useful there? You can sort of hypothesize about it and, okay, this is a great approach. But then running a proof of concept allows you to pick a success metric and test against it and see if there's utility. And if there's utility, then probably that same step in the permitting and licensing workflow, folks across the state government are having that same general concept that they want to improve. And so let's now show that there was success here and show what might be a path to adoption now that we've proven it out in one place.
Thank you, Delegate Szeliga, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here. One question is actually one request and one question. Delegate Bhandari mentioned in your presentation 1,300 permits, licenses, or certifications. Can we get a list of those? What relies on paper that could help us with our constituent responses?
That's a good question.
Yeah, there was a data call that was coordinated through the Transparent Government Act, so I can work with the team that's pulled that information together and see how we can share that back.
That'd be great, thank you. And then the question is, do we have any or how many agencies are still using outdated or legacy IT systems?
That is a great question. So we are currently looking at an inventory of those systems. So that was something that passed in legislation last year. So in addition to the AI inventory, there was also the requirement to go forth and gather sort of IT legacy systems as well. So we've had, over the past several months, kicked off that effort. We have staff that is going agency by agency. Partly it's a data call, tell us, for a lot of the agencies, it's pretty obvious, they have like a big procurement system or a big juvenile management system, and so there's sort of the obvious ones, but we've also been sort of working with them to question what is the full suite of modernization that you need to do. And so that'll be captured and articulated in an IT modernization plan that I believe is required of us to produce by December of this year.
But you haven't cataloged that yet?
It's in progress.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in progress. I mean, as you can imagine, it's hundreds of systems across the various agencies. And back to the question about centralization or not, DO-IT doesn't manage most of them. And in a lot of cases, there's a lot of systems that are just unknown to us, and so it's become quite an undertaking, as you might imagine.
Thank you.
Questions? Any other questions? Seeing none, I have just one request, actually a couple. Will you be so kind and send that list that Delegate Szeliga requested to the entire committee? That would be great if you could do that. My second request is, under the permitting pilot, where you stay focusing on small set of high-priority professional licenses for initial pilot, may I please, okay, it's okay. May I please suggest that perhaps you do the nurses, the board of nursing?
Yeah, for the licensing.
Okay? It's a request from all of us, am I right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you could do that one, the HGO committee, every single member here will be so grateful to you.
I was just gonna, well, actually, I was gonna give a question. I thought you were the one with the cookies. So I was gonna ask you about that, actually.
And I already put in my order.
I remember that from last year, but no, in all seriousness, I have a great relationship with Secretary Scott. I worked with her to hire her CIO over the past year, and Nishanta's built a great relationship with him as well. And so I think health is a good opportunity for us.
Yeah, that would be wonderful if you could do that. And can you give me an update on that, please, when you
Sure,
can?
I'd be happy to.
The other thing, I just want to thank the committee, and particularly the Government Operations Committee under the leadership of Delegate Curd and Lindsay Rowe for the bill last year. The more I hear you speak, it's a great bill. And you pass these bills and you forget what it does, and it's great work from this committee on that. And the work you have done is very impressive.
Thank you.
My last comment will be, is there a way to bring all these agencies, right, short of a mandate, right, which people do not like? Sometimes it requires a little bit of a hammer for people to do it and come into compliance, because it is a threat.
Yeah.
And we see it coming. It's going to come. It's not like, it's when, right? It's not if. So what can we do to help them come into compliance?
Compliance with sort of IT modernization, or it's a great question. I mean, this is one conversation that I do leverage the National Association of State CIOs around. There's a constant conversation about, are you centralized as a state or are you decentralized as a state? And I've seen different models and talked with other CIOs about what that would look like. I think in some ways it's been a bit of a false dichotomy. I think the question is, or rather I would state that there are services that should absolutely be centralized. I mean, back to the question, there shouldn't, how can you have 5 different identity and access management? That sort of defeats the point if everyone is allowed to do their own identity and access management. So I think there's a set of things that we need to codify as being centralized. Cybersecurity being another one of them. At the same time, I've had a couple of agencies, my peers and other agencies reach out to me and say, have you created my technology roadmap? And my answer to that would be no. I mean, your business. If you are running, the Department of Aging, you should know you have a perspective on what technology needs are coming down the pike for you. And so one of the things I'm trying to actively encourage my peers to do is to have IT leadership in their departments, because it makes them better consumers. If they have IT leadership who can then come to say, this is something we would wish for you to buy centrally, or I need to consume more of this for you centrally. So I think, to your question about where you can help, I think it's, one, helping us to ensure that we're trending towards that model, that it's not centralized, decentralized, but that we're thinking about what intelligent centralization looks like. And so that's something I would love to work with the committee on.
So if I may, I have a request. If you can ask the governor, can he require that these agencies, because we're not going to say centralize everything, right?
Right.
But what needs to be codified, right? What intelligence needs to be codified? Can he issue an executive order requiring them to do it?
It's a good question, and I think Friday's executive order is a good step in that direction. And it calls for intelligent government, it calls for modernization, it calls for us to look at how can we save money by consuming things more efficiently. But to your point, some of that will only be possible. At a certain point, there is going to have to be some kind of mandate that says, if you want to centrally negotiate laptop purchases. You can't go outside of that. And so I think we do need to, in something, we've continued to work with our office on, is how do we further that? How do we further underscore that there's going to need to be sort of a mandate to do things centrally?
May I ask you if you could create a list of things that you think should be codified, centralized, right? I like to be able to work with the governor's office to see if he can require it.
Yeah.
And if he cannot, then in the interim, if we can work on it, and we will create some type of, and we often do this in HGO, it doesn't need a bill, but we can come together to put something together. Will you work with us regarding that?
I would love that. I mean, I think we just kicked off this modernization initiative, and I suspect there's going to be a lot of those things. As the governor mentioned, we have a firm looking at where we can gain more efficiencies, and I think we're going to continue to learn a lot from that. Some of the things we're seeing initially are around centralized hardware, for example, software consolidation for not everything. I mean, some of the agencies have really bespoke platforms that not everyone needs to consume, and that doesn't need to be centralized, but everyone needs collaboration software. We're all using the same financial management system. So I think as we go through that effort, we're going to sort of tease out those things that should be centrally, and would love to keep that conversation with you going.
So our door is open.
We appreciate that.
It is 2:25. I want to say, thank you for being so transparent, so candid, for your hard work. It shows that your team has been working since we met last year. And I want to tell you that the committee, HGO Committee, and the leadership really appreciate all your efforts and the time, and your team as well. I take kudos to you. Our door here is open. Let us know what tools you need so that we can work on it. A lot of the members will be more than happy to put in a bill for you as well, okay?
We really appreciate
And I want to
that.
thank you for everything. I hope you have a blessed afternoon, and thank you for being so prepared. For my members, I want to say thank you for your question. They were so great, and it was a great hearing. I want you to stay seated for a minute as we go off so that I can just do some in-house stuff.
Okay.
And for those of you that are watching, thank you for your interest. And those of you that are here today, thank you for your time. And staff, thank you for putting this together.